Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Aliens and Angels podcast. I'm so happy that you could make it today, whether you're here in the live or watching on on a replay or on an audio podcast. This is absolutely lovely to have you here today. So I've got two very special guests who are going to join us. So that those would be Philip and Ronald Kinsella. Philip Kinsella is the author of numerous books and articles on UFOs and consciousness. Since Philip's own alien abduction back in the winter of 1989, along with the appearance of UFOs at close range, he has been driven to find the truth of what may be behind these alien intrusions, and has highlighted several theories surrounding the big question of the grays themselves. His speculation emphasizes a better understanding of multidimensional levels of consciousness and our need to look outside the box of rational thinking, which science continually denies within the advent of such strange singularities. And Ronald Kinsella, he is also an author. He's an artist. He's currently working on a science fiction novella aimed at adults and based on an ugly future. He also plans to rekindle his passion for building his own models using the very latest in resin technology along with sculpting software. He aims to create large representations of his imagination, highlighting monsters and robots and spaceships. Ronald has also experienced his own alien abduction. All of the links are featured below in the description. I want to thank you in advance for liking, commenting, subscribing, and please do share my content with your friends. And I'm very happy to announce that YouTube channel memberships are now available so that you can receive my perks and help to support my channel. So without further ado, I bring on Philip and Ronald Kinsella. Hi, guys. So glad to have you back on the Aliens and Angels podcast.
Well, it's a delight to be back with you, Karen. Thank you so much for inviting us. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. It's always a pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much. You're just two of my favorite people, and I love everything you have to say. So I'm just thrilled to bits that you could make it today. Now, I want to start off by just clarifying that there are many, many, many different opinions and experiences to do with what we call the grays. Now, what I consider to be the grays is a vast community or even separate communities. They could be trans-dimensional beings. They could be three-dimensional beings. They could be, from different family lines. Like, who knows? We've had so many different experiences, and some people are saying, no, I've had lifelong experience and there is no hybrid program. And other people are saying, oh, I've had lifetime experience and I was involved in the hybrid program. And so I think it's important to clarify that although we're going to be talking from our own points of reference today, we're not saying that any one person is right or any one person is wrong. In fact, once people start setting themselves up as being the sole authority, then to me that smacks of cultism. Philip and Ronald, do you have anything you want to add to that before we kind of get started today?
No, I absolutely agree with you on that entirely, Karen. We must be careful because each individual encounter is personal to the person who's experienced it, and there are many different kinds of encounters, and I respect that completely.
I also have to say I agree with you because at the end of the day, humans, as human beings, we don't even know the reality of our genesis, although we do have some idea. And we have to understand that there are different types of humans. So, when we are discussing the greys, the mysterious, part of the greys, which is interesting, will be different variations of these greys, just as there are humans and just as there are reptilians. Let's bring them into the fray as well too. So we could be dealing with not only ultra-dimensional, ultra-terrestrial, interdimensional. I mean, the list goes on. We don't know, but I think it's very, very dangerous when someone, pigeonholes something and says that this is the truth, when we are open and trying to understand on a larger level of what we represent beyond the human. And it always reminds me of the film Avatar. And the most beautiful part that they had in that was for humans to integrate with the alien species. They had to become part of that species. And I thought that idea was very reminiscent to the incarnation process, which is very interesting. So I agree with you absolutely. We do not have the answers. And it's important that we're open to all forms of speculation, because the moment that you say no, it's this, then that dismantles a lot of other people's understanding of the phenomena and upsets their constructed belief systems. We have to be very careful when we're addressing these major points. So I agree with you, because when people start to become, leaders or authorities in it, that, as you quite rightfully stated, Karen, becomes cult status, and that is dangerous territory.
I would agree. Very well said. Thank you. So today, of course, we don't have time in one episode of the Aliens and Angels podcast to get into all aspects of the Greys. So I thought we would zero in on their attempts at physicality. And Philip and Ronald and myself have all three published books that go quite a bit into the situation with the Greys. And there's one thread that runs through all of our books that I thought was surprisingly similar. And I actually wrote my book before I read Philip's book, and now I'm working on Ron's book. And so I went, I think there's something here. And that is, as you mentioned, Philip, the avatar. I think, and based on the research that I personally have done, I think that there is that these are actually transdimensional beings. They may not even have physicality, but to come into our realm, they need to have an avatar. They need to have something. And the fact that they all look so similar, well, not necessarily, but kind of, what I think makes them, why I would personally classify them as being Greys, is because their skin does not reflect that. I don't think they have the pigment to reflect the color spectrum as our human eyes are able to pick it up. And so they all appear to be gray, and we tend to generalize about them. But I'm thinking that their bodies might be some kind of environment suit, something that they are able to, because they're so technologically advanced, that they're able to shuttle their intelligence or consciousness within this suit in order to have contact with humans. So I'll turn it over to you, Philip and Ronald, to add whatever you would like to add to that.
Yes, I mean, our investigations have taken us into the near-death experience, to incarnation, reincarnation, and it would make sense. I mean, we use spacesuits, right, when we go into space, and we need some kind of equipment. They all look the same. You look at one spacesuit from the United States of America, looks very similar to one from the USSR. So it's important, I think, that perhaps these higher forms of intelligences must have some kind of vessel in order to make contact with us. And even though this contact may operate on a level that our consciousness cannot even begin to understand, let alone grasp, in our current incarnation, as it were. And I think it's interesting because, they seem to be lowering their vibrational state into a level that can match ours. It's rather like a near-death experience. So someone has an NDE and they are temporarily removed from their body, and the world that they enter is more real than the one they left behind. And we see this transference. So as humans, the biological suit that we inhabit is literally only temporary, and it is a vessel for our consciousness, or spirit rather, to become enmeshed within this reality, if not temporarily. So I believe that these remote viewers could also be remote influencers, that is, certain types of greys that are able to connect with us, because they do seemingly operate on varied levels of dimensional reality. And this I argued back in 1989 after my own abduction, which I'm not going to go into, but how it was that the real essence of me, i.e. the soul, spirit rather, was taken away from its biological unit and brought into their dimension of awareness. And that was all the way back in 1996. So I agree with you, that and I love the word avatar, because that says everything, because the body is just a temporary vessel for experience. And if they are operating on higher levels of dimensional awareness, they will have to lower those dimensions of reality in order to create contact, rather like a signal going into a physical mobile phone. There's a connection there. So that's how I see it.
Yes, I think that's a beautiful way of putting it, actually. If they were so advanced, they would have the ability to translate their consciousness into artificial bodies, not robots as such, but certainly vehicles to move around in. I did state, or I suspected, the Roswell crash, the very famous case of 1947, that if there were bodies, and they would be like dolls, we would marvel at, perhaps their makeup and not understand it, but it would make sense that they would translate consciousness into bodies that can survive space travel or interdimensional travel, because we must remember, from where they come from must be harshly different from what we are, our actual level of existence. So they had to become corporeal, physical. So when they enter our realm, they will affix themselves or attune themselves to our physical behaviors, our physical rights. You see what I mean? So in order for them to travel here, they certainly would be able to, even from vast distances, by having artificial bodies. And as you said, with the consciousness translated into it.
Yeah, and there's one more thing I'd like to add there, Karen. We as humans go through a process of incarnation and reincarnation. This is an area that's very, very interesting, and where most compartments of the paranormal, as they're called, and UFO research have been decompartmentalized. I believe there are connections. Now, it could be possible that these intelligences, such as the Greys, let's take them for an example, have removed themselves from that process of incarnation and reincarnation. And this is perhaps why they come across as so vastly more superior than we are. And so I think this is important. I think, if they have escaped that process, but we are still locked into it, because as humans, we are so far removed from all other species, and including all other areas of the paranormal. We are so far removed. This is very interesting to question in terms of this process of incarnation, reincarnation. So it's possible or feasible that they have got to a level where they no longer need to incarnate or reincarnate on that level. And we would see them as like gods, basically.
Yep, I totally agree with you. If it's okay with you, I'd like to read just 2 paragraphs from my book
Yes.
called Transdimensional: Meet the New Neighbors. And this is from page 68. And this is from one of my experiences where I found myself aboard the big ship. So I've written, one day I saw a group of a half dozen or so generic clone beings touring the big ship, and noticed that although they were identical, there was variety in the way that they held their posture, walked, gestured, and showed facial expression. They were all sort of a gray color because they have no need for skin pigment, are about 5.5 feet tall, are completely hairless, and have large dark eyes that look completely black. As I experienced from as I experienced from using a generic clone body myself once or twice for temporary access to the big ship, the eyes are black to accommodate the light sensitivity that many beings experience during consciousness transfer. And the tight jumpsuit-like garments are simply shrink-wrapped onto them. Visitor beings usually only occupy these clone bodies for a few hours or for 1 or 2 day awake and sleep cycles, so there's no need for them to wear popular clothes or even eat while aboard the big ship. This is why their ears, noses, and mouths appear to be underdeveloped, and they look more like what we would consider to be stereotypical grays in appearance. I never asked what happens to their clone bodies once the beings withdraw their consciousness from them because I didn't want to know, and I don't have any knowledge of how they were created in the first place. So I thought the thing that was interesting is I actually experienced using one of those clone bodies a couple of times, but the process I was completely uncomfortable with. When you look in the mirror and you're used to seeing yourself, and then you look in the mirror and you appear to be a completely different being, it's actually psychologically a real shakeup. But because this is a process they use on the big ship, and as I've explained, and as I explain in my book, the big ship is not in a physical space. It is in a transdimensional space where many different realities can overlap and beings can come to and fro because of that location. So I won't talk too much more about my experience, but then I was reading Philip's book, and let's see, I really highly recommend it. Whoops. So the links to these are below in the description. Terrestrial Trespassers, wonderful book. You can see all my little tags where I want to go back and read sections again and think more about the book. And in it, and please correct me if I'm not saying this correctly, Philip, but you talk about how you feel that their bodies are like avatars or containers that allow them to come into our realm. And I know you've already spoken a bit to that, but I'm wondering if you want to add more about that, or even about your book, because I highly recommend people buy all three of these books, and then you can think for yourself and pass the information back and forth uh, within yourself to come to some kind of an idea of what's going on.
Yes, well, I think it's wonderful that at the moment we don't have an idea of what's going on. We do have ideas, we do have theories, and they're important to each and every one of us. And every one of those must be respected. And as I said before, there are good ETs and there are bad ETs. It's the same with humans. And our concept of bad is seen through a very human way because we are very humanized. In this world, we are so condensed within our centralized programming from a system that tells us what is real and what is not. And when you've been touched by the singularity, that changes everything for you. And in these situations, these unique situations, which are unique to you as the individual, your translation of them will be very different from someone else's. So when we're dealing with the Greys, what's fascinating, what's really incredible, is that they are very interested in our process of reproduction. It could be because they themselves go through a separate process entirely, that i.e. they do not reproduce or go through the birthing cycle as we do. And perhaps, have we ever considered, and I did mention this in another one of my works, that they actually could be the geneticists. They could be a higher level of angelic influences that are there to kind of like tweak and make arrangements or changes to, certain species. I mean, if we look at the humans, the human species, at the moment, we're a very destructive. Well, we've always been destructive. Let's put it that way. Not at the moment, but
not everyone.
Not everyone, but the majority of humans, are very different from the Greys because they're a collective one hive mind consciousness. The trouble with humans is that no one knows what the other person's thinking or what their intentions are. So, I think it's interesting when we look at the greys that present themselves almost in an orderly fashion, in a controlled fashion. And, they go about their business very quickly. They come into our reality very quickly and then go out. So I believe that what we're dealing with here is, there could be several conclusions. One's that they have, removed themselves from the process of incarnation, reincarnation, the laborious level that we go through as humans. And this is the other thing that most people won't accept with regards to God, the main source of what we're all connected to. Would they come from the same source that we come through? Well, I believe that. I absolutely believe that, because the one creates everything as we understand it. So I believe that, the greys are interested in us as a reproductive species. They're interested in us as, individuals and with our own centralized ideas about things. So, that's the big question we're looking into. And, it's very, very fascinating to consider these factors.
Absolutely. And again, remember you said earlier that it seems that they have bypassed the reincarnation process. Maybe the actual conception and birth of a human being is what brings them back in, whereas the greys have other ways of reproducing their bodies, and that might be even why sorry, got cat hair on my face. That might be, another reason why they don't have the reincarnation process. And also, Ronald's got a book called Illusions. It's kind of a bit of a darker book about the greys, but super fascinating with lots to think about. Both Philip and Ronald, their book is not just about the greys. It includes all kinds of paranormal experiences, plus things like even the way that ETs have become manifest in our reality. It used to be through dirigibles, and it seems like each generation of technology, that's what they project as. And so I thought your book was really well named, Ronald, as Illusions, Smoke and Mirrors of the UFO ET Paranormal Enigma. And again, I think it's all part of the same genre. I think that we slice it up into these separate, the paranormal and the cryptids and the greys, but I think it might all be part of something much greater than us. And sorry, Ronald, do you want to get into a little bit about your perspective from your book?
Yes, as you stated rightly, Karen, it deals with the negative or the darker aspects. It doesn't encompass the spectrum of the good, which there are, because I'm just focusing on a particular point, which can be very uncomfortable. And I appreciate that and I respect that, but it's not to denounce other people's their own experiences of their good ETs, which there no doubt will be good people out there. It's just focusing on a particular little point in a large spectrum of encounters with people. So yes, the fact of what you mentioned about the translation of mind or consciousness into manufactured or built bodies is very fascinating. That has always fascinated me because it is a point we must consider. And I do consider every point across the board. I don't denounce anything. I may not agree with it, but I don't denounce it. I never do. And one point I will make is the fact that it always pans back to Roswell. Now, the point is, I do believe that was a ship. It might well have been from another dimension, a demon rather than from outer space, although the fashionable gimmick of a flying saucer was quite popular then, so that is what they would use to gain attention. They couldn't crash it in a town or city. That just wouldn't do. It had to be just on the outskirts where they would know that the military would collect it. For the reason I do not know, but I believe that they would have pilots on, and certainly they were either made, as we'll call them, little dolls, with consciousness pumped into them, perhaps even expendable. It sounds rotten, but in comparison to us, rather like robots. So they would use this intelligence, their own version of robot, to study us. And I think that's what spearheaded my interest from Roswell into considerations of what we're dealing with on multiple levels. I mean, that is just one aspect of, of the alien regime, and certainly what is being reported by people. Then we move on to the mantids and the reptilians. There's a whole spectrum of them, but I don't see any reason why not, that they have adopted this incredible ability to build or borrow bodies to actually infiltrate.
And I will just mention here, which is interesting about the Roswell, and highly controversial case, but there again, many of the famous UFO cases are highly controversial. Isn't it interesting that when the Roswell Army released the data through the newspapers that they were in possession of a flying disc, and then it was changed to a mobile weather balloon, a secret mobile weather balloon, so secret in fact that the Army didn't know it was out there. And furthermore, another point that we could speculate is that the technology that was recovered, or we assume theoretically recovered from that craft, and we all know that there's a lot of controversy and people believing that the Army were in possession of something so advanced. Philip Corso, in his book The Day After Roswell, stated this technology. Now, isn't it interesting that the technology was just in reach of what we could kind of replicate? So was this intelligence wanting to spearhead the human species into an advanced level of technological, supremacy?
Well, that's right, because as I said, it would seem to be like a Trojan horse. And I mentioned that
you did
when I published it in Digital Demon years ago, many years ago. And from we moved on, progressed from the valve to then the transistor to the microprocessor. So is it possible that we were being given guidance or help through these little packages? I also mentioned in there that at this time, or during the time of these downings, and I was suspicious of the fact that they could just crash so swiftly, and always not within towns or cities, but in the wilderness, but just enough to be recovered by the military. So we are being watched or observed very keenly by an intelligence that knows us very well. I even assumed that if they were building these pilots, which they can do, they're smart enough, that these ships, as I said, what is in vogue in the 50s, the flying saucers, which would captivate us very much. We would identify it as a spaceship, to an acorn-shaped thing or anything that was silver or fell from the sky. They would have to look different each time if they were planted or downed, along with the pilots, which they could engineer so as not to raise suspicion that the same species was having the same problem at the same time. If, it's only a hypothesis, this is the case, then they have been delivering something to us. What that is, we're not going to know, because as we are all well aware, that when these things happen, it becomes super secret and is apprehended by the military. So I have no doubt that our friends in high places are delivering messages or packages to us, whether placed in the wrong hands, I don't know. And it would seem also that what is logical at the moment, or what would seem logical, is that from where we are and from where they are, our world would appear to be respectfully a little bit more hostile, whether it's conditions, I'm talking about the environment, because they're very brief. The encounters, they slip in and then slip out. It's like the cryptids and all that. They slip in, they slip out. So they manufacture these pilots to guarantee sustainability on a physical level, albeit they could be injured or killed, but they're expendable to them, it would seem, or it would give them a hypothesis to actually deliver these messages, one, to observe us, or if it's in the case of the Trojan horses, to deliver or dispatch something that they know will be delivered and picked up by our military. To what end, I don't know. I mean, that's where it goes blank. But if you look at the data, especially what we've researched, there is something happening. And it in a way, it's exciting, because perhaps it could be that they were trying to help us or assist with our evolution from the valve to the transistor to the microprocessor. This is only radical thinking, a hypothesis. It's only just a thought. It's not set in stone. But it's gone into the wrong hands, because, you know, as we know, respectfully, with the military, they will find these things and they will weaponize them or try to. And, you know, could this be a grave error on their behalf? We don't know. If there are more packages being dispatched, I don't think so now. Perhaps they've learned that that was the wrong thing to do, really. You know, we don't know. But it's fascinating. But yes, absolutely. The actual ability for these things to enter our airspace, I believe, is limited but not impossible. They come in and then go out. It's brief, but they are there all the same.
Yeah, there's one other point that I did make in one of my books, is the process of the intelligence manifesting into our physical reality. And after speaking with Dr. Aruna Scott, a ufologist herself, you know, it is conceivable to assume that this phenomena is able to morph itself by encompassing most of the Earth materials as it comes into our dimension of reality, because on a lot of the crash retrieval programs that have occurred, a lot of the physical and chemical analysis of the UFOs has shown a lot of unique, you know, material that's not that unique to us here, but there's always a little something that's that is not from here. So rather like just giving another example here, and I know it sounds crazy, but UFOs coming in that the intelligence builds and its mass by, you know, taking materials from our Earth as it enters into our dimension of reality. If you take another example, which I thought about, the Skinwalker Ranch, when the Sherman family were and had the encounter with the big wolf, and of course they shot it, and then the piece of hide that came off it was, when they found it, was rotting. You know, are these intelligences using material from our end in order to reconstruct themselves as they come into this level of reality? We don't know. And that's a fascinating point that we have to keep open to conjecture, certainly.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, and nowadays we're finding out that they are using humans with psionic abilities, which I think actually we all have them, but we're just not necessarily developed them, to call in, craft of various shapes and sizes and beings, and then zapping them and hauling away their stuff. And to me, there's a bit of audacity there that you could be doing that to a group of beings that are so far advanced that they're able to travel transdimensionally and think you're going to get away with it. What are they thinking, first of all? But second of all, I wanted to talk a little bit about there seems to be two really different versions of experiences with the Greys, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it. So the first version is like the Whitley Strieber and people like him who seem to have experiences with very much robot-like, although fleshly, bodies. And what always gives them away is a tremendous stink, because they don't have a digestive system like us. They apparently excrete toxins through their skin, and they have this horrible smell of sulfur and ammonia that just makes people want to retch. And there's quite a lot of people that have talked about those kind of encounters. And then there are a lot of people who've had encounters where smell doesn't seem to come into it at all. And I'm wondering if these are higher models, better models, or is this actually more transdimensional? So as you both have mentioned, and is in my experience where we feel like we're physical, but we're actually being transported in a higher dimensional frequency, and they're able to still experiment and do whatever they need to do and get whatever they would need from the physical body, even though it seems to be more of our etheric. So I don't know what I have no idea. I'm just putting it out there as something, that I've wondered about, and I'm wondering if I can get your thoughts on
I
that.
have explored this theory back in 1996 and developed upon the theoretical model. Of course, we are, as humans, the composite of two beings. We have the biological hardware, and then you have the consciousness, the spirit, which is a separate energy of vibration. And rather like an NDEer that goes through an experience, even though they have made a temporary severance from their biological body, when they go into the light and communicate with their loved ones or higher beings, communication is achieved through telepathy. There's a sense of timelessness. On a lot of occasions, when the soul or spirit, rather, of the individual returns back to the body, they go through a form of transformation. And in some unique cases, their diseased body or their terminal illness is reversed. And so there's been some correction made while their, what we consider their journey into the etheric has taken place. There is still a connection, rather like a signal that goes into a mobile phone. There's never any real disconnection, even if you turn the phone off. Just giving a simple example there. And with the abduction phenomena, sure, because the real essence of you is being brought into the graceful frequency of reality, and interaction is possible, even though there is still a lifeline that attaches your etheric to the biological form. What they do to the imprinting of that etheric will naturally affect its physical counterpart. And you were right there also about some people experiencing the greys in different ways, rather like the biological systems of greys and those that are love and light. Well, think about the NDE experiences, and we have to make comparisons on an interdimensional level. Look at those people that have had the very negative experiences with lower demons, that they call them, in the astral planes when they've crossed over, or those nightmarish realms, and other people that have gone to the higher realms. So, when we are looking at the near-death experience and the abductions, although they are not connected in the way that we would see it, we are talking and making references to the interdimensional realities and the experiences felt by them. So again, I feel it's important that, like humans, you will have different species of humans. In terms, when I say species, in the way that most people have developed throughout their sovereignty within their cultures, and also how people are very different from other people. So the same must occur and does occur, as we understand, not just in alien abductions, as we call them, but also in the near-death experience state that individuals report when they come back. So I think it's very important that, there is always an opposite to something, isn't there? There's always a positive and a negative. And that's the law of thermodynamics, as well as the law of human thinking, as it were.
Well, I just think that they can upgrade.
Yes.
Why not?
Yeah.
Why not? They have earlier models. You get your Morris Minors and your Rolls Royces. Perhaps there's a level.
That is a beautiful way of putting it.
I dare say that when we have the ability to, and I think it will happen, where we can extend our lives through this wonderful science they have now, genetic engineering and all that, when they'll be able to extend us, it will be for those who can afford it. I'm not saying you have your poor aliens and your rich aliens, but it could be by rank. It could be by sovereignty, who knows, all for purpose. As I said about the Roswell, what's interesting is that they, to my mind, could well have been just not just whipped up. That's a crude way of saying it, but if they were expendable pilots used primarily to guide the ship in, and then to give off the illusion of having a crash when it actually was, if it was, premeditated,
stage managed.
It was stage managed by the superior forces who, one, can observe us, and two, deliver something or dispatch something. What we don't know, we've assumed it's technology, but who can say? But so why not? And people talk about time as well. Yes, we use it, we need it. It's merely a measurement, but they must be so far ahead of us in terms of human time that they can quite swiftly, absolutely make bodies. And wouldn't that be amazing to think that they can go on and on, apart from the pilots who were perhaps expendable? And if it depends on the environment they enter. If they become physical, remember, we don't know where they're coming from. So if it's from outer space or another dimension, their physics, their reality might very well be different from ours. I mean, you stated yourself, didn't you, about the color, the gray, in them, the pigment. But it could be that from where they come from, they may be looking, or they may be completely different to how we envision them when they come here. They're giving off that appearance so that we can accept them. The embryonic nature I mentioned, newborn, fresh. Where if we went to their realm, their reality or what they really are might quite be shocking. So they could be kind in projecting themselves in a kind of humanoid manner when they might be anything but.
And also, if we look at the human species, it has gone through varied mutations. And interestingly, when we go back into the antediluvian cultures, and especially about, Neanderthal man and Cro-Magnon man, the Homo sapiens, sapien, we can't find the links to suggest that we have gone through a progressive level of evolution. And this calls into questions Darwin's supposed thoughts about that we evolved from the apes. And if you look at the human, I believe, like you, that we are manufactured from extraterrestrials because we are not suited for this planet. We shy from our very own sun. We don't have the hair on our body to protect us from the varied elements. And certainly in terms of strength, we're very weak. So, when we look at this, it's really fascinating to know that a lot of what we're being told is wrong. No matter how hard science tries to, hoodwink you into the belief that this is how it is, but we'll just leave those loose ends there. But it's good that people like yourself, researchers and authors like yourself, truth seekers, are looking and digging away, rather like archaeologists, to find that truth. It's interesting.
It sure is. And what I loved about because a lot of what I know is based on other people's work and research, like yourselves.
Yes.
But what I loved about both of your books is it brings out that, about 100 years ago, or maybe even longer, when so-called ETs, I don't know what they are, but they showed up in dirigibles and the things that people could relate to at the time. But the human observers always said it was as though the intruders, let's just call them ETs for a common phrase here, although they thought they fit in rather well to the humans, no, not so much. They were a goofy bunch. And there was always things wrong with the way they were dressed, or, they thought they were passing it like humans, but really they weren't at all. And I thought that was funny because you would expect, because they're so technologically and, I don't know, intellectually advanced, that they would understand humans a bit better. But maybe that's why they were there, to try to understand them. But anyway, I just thought it was funny that you could dress them up, but you can't really pass them off.
That reminds
me of.
That reminds me of, if you look at, perhaps, let's just say Dungeons and Dragons. Let's take this as an example. It's a game, right? And you've got all your little figures. Where they come from, they might well be observing us in that capacity. Let's just call it that. Let's just say if they see it like that. So they're going to try and fashion, or it's possible they'd fashion their pilots or their visitors into something like a dwarf, or perhaps, a kind of giant. But it's not exactly as they probably would or could match at that moment. We have to think of everything. It's wonderful. It's really great to just throw it out there, So perhaps it's like a matchmaking thing that doesn't go quite as planned. So the sources gave it away because we favored them in the B movies. I wasn't around them, but in the 50s and that, they were very fashionable. So guess what they do? They build the sources because they would be identified as such from outer space. If they're interdimensional, it would have to look like something fantastic, glittering, silver even. Silver, why silver? But they were, a lot of them were. At the time, silver was in vogue. They weren't sure about the pilots, so they alternated them as long as they were humanoid. This is fascinating because this intelligence, whatever it is, I do believe that they are, as you rightly said, Karen, they are passing themselves off as close to us as possible, albeit it's not exactly what we have in mind for, being a perfect human from their end. Perhaps it's intentional. Perhaps the very look of them is symbolic. I stated the greys look embryonic, newborn, fresh. Is that a statement from them? Have they fashioned themselves to give off this approach that there is a new species to come, or it is arriving? You know, it's just wonderful to lash out these wonderful, really out there, you know, questions, because as you rightly stated, none of us have any answers, but we have, by God, we have to speculate, and it's wonderful to push every button. And I'm not denouncing any of it. As I said, I may not agree with it, but I'm not denouncing, because that would make me just as bad as those that project their views arrogantly and state that you are wrong. And I cannot do that. So I think it's a wonderful idea. What do you think about Dungeons and Dragons, about the trolls? You know, it's like us looking at them and trying to fashion, if we saw a species and try and fashion ourselves or our underlings to look like them as we enter that realm. You know, it's no different. It's just, it's kind of like a makeup. That's probably why a lot of the greys look different, because, you know, you have different types of them. They're described. Being an artist myself, I illustrate quite a few of them, and people say that's not what they look like. That's not what they look like. Well, it might be quite possible that they alter according to, you know, how they feel, or it could be possible that they cannot sustain a regular model, that it moves on or it changes. You know, these are just thoughts you just throw out there, you know. But if you were so advanced, you could do anything. It would be godly, you know, to a degree. But there would even be, I would imagine, from their end, limitations. We have them. Why not they?
I also think there's a spiritual battle going on here as well. And I think this is half the problem. I think the reality of this is when we go back into the ancient codices, you know, the story says a very different one from the one that's been promoted within certain cults and religious ideologies. And I think there's a silent war going on. And I believe that a lot of good people on this planet are and have incarnated from other systems, rather like seeds coming onto Earth that have awoken, and they're trying to wake other people up. So there's something very unique about Earth. There's something very unique about the birthing cycle, reincarnation, incarnation, because this just isn't about extraterrestrial intelligences landing and, you know, connecting with humans. There's a much bigger part to all of this that we're trying to dig away at. But the system that we serve here at the moment is absolutely adamant continually to bring negativity in and to disrupt the human psyche. And I believe think it's wonderful that a lot of good souls out there, yourself included, that are fighting for the freedom of that knowledge that inspires and lifts us to a different level of reality.
Yeah, well, I've got a friend here. I'm going to show you him. We should send him in to sort them out.
Yeah, he's beautiful.
Isn't he beautiful? Yeah.
Yeah, I come from a gaming family. My son-in-law is a dungeon master, very good dungeon master. And so I come from a big gaming family, not just online, but also actual board games and Dungeons and Dragons and computers and all that stuff. We're all into all that
I love it.
stuff.
I love
Yeah, I do too. But I was going to say that when we don't take a stance that says my version is right, everybody else is wrong, that's so confining. When we say I don't know, but I'm speculating, I'm guessing, and this is the best I can make of it, we can go anywhere. We can explore up and down and back and forth. I wanted to tell you another experience I had where I have a contact. I call him Bob the Gray. That's not his real name, but that's what I call him. And I meet with him in astral form or just telepathically. And one day I was really concentrating because I wanted to see what he looked like, because he kind of comes across like a stereotypical gray in appearance. And when I did that, he immediately flashed a huge, big, toothy human smile onto his face because he didn't want me to see what he really looked like. And the reason it wasn't deception, it was because he didn't want me to become afraid. And we as humans tend to be a bit timid when it comes to some, beings that look a bit different than us. And so he did it out of a kindness. But it's like both of you have alluded, we don't really know what they look like or whether they're just pure consciousness but these avatar bodies seem to be at this time what is representing them.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. That reminds me of a bit from Contact, the film Contact, where Jodie Foster was catapulted across the dimensions, and when she finally met the aliens, so they projected themselves as us to be kind, because she wasn't ready. She
Yeah.
wasn't ready for it, so she wasn't ready. They knew they were being kind because they stated, "You're not ready for it yet," you know.
Yeah. And I think also it's very important, that we do not get into that category of stating that I have the answers. Let me
Yeah.
make one thing plain. I'm afraid I don't have a clue. All we have are theories. And when you're doing your research, we have to be very open and very careful when we're dealing with many varied experiences that people have had. And it's rather like one person, if they're involved in a situation, let's just say some catastrophic situation here on Earth, they will view that witnessing very different from someone else's way of how they see it. So each and every one of us are unique within the way that we process our information, and we have that experience. The trouble in this world is everyone's trying to squeeze everything into the same box, and it will not fit. I will just say it is very dangerous to put yourself in that category, because you will end up finding yourself in an intellectual cul-de-sac, and that does not help serve the greater cause. And let's look at science. It continuously changes. It continuously goes through a process of transmutation. That's science alone. So with this, in terms of ufology and paranormal research, it morphs, and so too you'll find that you will go through that same process.
Yes. Also, I'd add to that is that the fact that, let's take the reptilians as an example, they're not all bad. I wouldn't think they're very good ones as well, I should imagine. An author, gave a prime example to that in a book that I've read 3 times. It was called Childhood's End. It was by Arthur C. Clarke. And I absolutely lapped this book up. And what it was they had visitations from these wonderful visitors, and the visitors put the earth to rights. And they did it in the most amazing way, where they stopped greed, they stopped crime. The supervisor of these were Corellon. That's what he wanted to be called, but he wouldn't show himself. The agreement was they couldn't show themselves because we're not ready. Well, the day came when Corellon was to reveal himself. They had fixed the world. It was utopia to a degree. People loved them. They even referred to them as the angels. And when he made his appearance, he looked like the devil. And this was a wonderful lesson, that appearances can be deceptive. And I absolutely loved Corellon, the character in the book. I loved him. And of course, they could extend life, they can prevent death, they can slow down time. And, so that was an example of a prejudice of, even that's why they knew that, because of our biblical past and, the actual brainwashing of Lucifer appearing like that, they were them, and yet they were saints. So I think that's fascinating. We can't always, even from what is described to us, even the reptilians, we can't always say they're bad or they're evil because of how they look. That is, I think Arthur C. Clarke did a wonderful job in exemplifying that fact quite nicely.
Yes, so true. And we've been brainwashed, at least that's my opinion.
Oh,
We've
yeah.
been brainwashed to see certain symbols as being evil and certain symbols as being good. Take, for instance, just a pentacle or a pentagram. Many people believe that's a beautiful symbol of, the different directions, not to mention above and below. Other people say, oh my God, that's a symbol of the devil, and don't even think about that symbol, it's evil. Like, we've got all kinds of opinions based on what we've been taught, and so things might look quite differently than what we think they do. And I notice we're quickly coming to the end of the show, but we're not finished yet. I just want to say a quick hello to Denise, to Tennessee, Kentucky Bigfoot, and to Van Darkholm. They are here for just about every show I do, and I appreciate them very, very much. It's always nice to have people in the live chat. I can't always get to their comments, but they get to chat with each other, and it definitely adds to the show. So I'm thinking, how about if we talk, because I know you guys have gone through a lot of changes with publishers and different things like that. But I can't help but stress the importance of both your books. I think people would love the information and get a lot out of it. And so, Illusions, Smoke and Mirrors of the UFO, ET, and Paranormal Enigma. Is this actually still available?
Um,
Ronald, and if not, what do you suggest, and what would you like people to do who want to follow and support you?
That's very kind, Karen. The book has been retracted, both of them, The Digital Demon and Illusions, but I have a new publisher. It's being finalized, so give it some time. They are publishing the ebook, I believe, but I think I will bring out the paperbacks myself. It will give me full control over them. So Digital Demon at the moment is being polished up. I'm not altering the narrative in there because the originals were done anyway, so people would find out if I've changed anything, and I'm not going to do that. But that and Illusions will be published, I would imagine, Illusions realistically perhaps the beginning of next year, reissued, but Digital Demons certainly this year, most definitely, as an ebook by the publishers and as an actual physical book by myself. And the actual Digital Demon, I like that because it goes back into our Mindfulness past, the 80s, to try and give them a taste of what it was like, those that have never experienced it, and the horrors we went through, not with the supernatural that came later on. Certainly there was a number of incidents in the 80s, but more so the teachers we had, just to add a bit of flair to it.
Wonderful, wonderful. And Philip, I know you've been going through some transitions with your publishers as well. I am so lucky I got your books when I did, that's for sure. So yours is Terrestrial Trespassers, The Greys, Abductions, and Areas of High Strangeness. I highly recommend if you can get this. Now, I have a link in the description. It may not actually work. So I'm just wondering, Philip, can people get your book, and in what format and where,
Yes.
and all that kind of stuff? And also, please feel free to recommend other books and things that you're doing right now.
Yeah, Terrestrial Trespassers, I signed a new contract with another publishing company and their marketing company. So Terrestrial Trespassers has been released as an ebook, Kindle, sorry, and it's available as audio. Russ Williams, an amazing artist, has done the audio of the book, and I was able to have the rights to publish the paperback myself, so they're all linked in Terrestrial Trespassers, and the book has a new introduction by another researcher, Pierre Sabac. So that's all out there. I have a new book coming out this year called The Eternal Avatar with another very dear friend of mine who's co-authored it, Chris John Mays, and that deals with the incarnation, reincarnation process, the spirit, and the whole process of our being here, theoretically. And I'm working on a new article for a big magazine, and then a new book that deals with the cryptids and energy and UFOs, and seeing if we can make some theoretical connections on that level. So yes, I'm also bringing out a science fiction novella, which you mentioned in the beginning.
Sorry, Ronald, I just want to say you guys cut out just for a minute and then you cut back in. So please, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's
please,
all right.
Maybe, Philip, you could just what you finished off with, and then go over to what Ronald's telling us. Sorry about that.
That's all right. The Eternal Avatar is due out this year. And the co-author is Chris John Mays, a dear friend of mine. It talks about incarnation, reincarnation, and the universal soul theory. And I'm working on a new UFO book and cryptid book that deals with the energy, and trying to see if we can make some theoretical connections on that level, because the Dogman certainly fascinates me. So
yeah, and I'm working on as you mentioned as we started, I'm working on a science fiction novella. It's finished. I'm just tidying it up, but it is of a foul future. But there's a surprise in it, and I think it's very positive. I think one of the only books I think with a positive ending, because I'm well known for being very dark and gloomy, especially with my art.
It's wonderful. I love it.
And we have your
Absolutely love
amazing
it.
book as well. We have
Yeah.
your amazing book as well
Yeah.
too.
Thank you.
We
Thank
reviewed
you.
it
I
on
forgot
Amazon.
to mention, please buy
Yeah.
my book too, Transdimensional Meet the New Neighbors. And that is about rather than having extraterrestrials come here into my world, I was taken to their
To
world.
them, yeah,
And
that's right.
and I know it's completely unbelievable. I don't expect anybody to believe me, but there are a lot of truth bombs in my book that I think people would appreciate. And also, I think it's okay to go against the mainstream narrative.
I mean, I think we all fall into the same category there, Karen, all of us.
There's no more fantastic than being abducted. Why should it be far-fetched?
Well, exactly. But, I have, I guess, what you would call internalized oppression, where my knee-jerk reaction is to expect people to not believe me or make fun of me or whatever, because we've all had to deal with way too much of that on top of what we've been through.
Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, I've, as honestly as I possibly could, written about my experiences. And I think it's a positive book overall. Now, I do agree that it's not all love and light when it comes to ETs. I think there's different agendas. I think there's overlap between the angelic and the demonic realms.
yes.
I think there's overlap between the transdimensional and perhaps even human created and human generated realms, and on it goes. And again, like we all have been saying during this program today, we don't know. We don't have all the answers, but we keep checking it out and wondering and asking questions and checking in with each other. And it's wonderful. Makes me very happy anyway.
And the same with
Oh,
us as well too. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you, Denise. Denise says Karen's books are wonderful. Thank
They
you.
are.
I also want to give a shout out to Vincent Muller, who's also joined us in the live chat. So before we go, is there anything else you'd like to tell my audience? Anything you want to invite them to, let them be aware of? And where can they find you? For those that are listening on an audio podcast, might be good just to say, your websites or wherever people can find you.
You go ahead, Ronnie.
Shall I go first?
Sure.
You mentioned my resin building, my model sculpting.
Yes.
Yes, I'm actually currently working on my mechanical dog. We love him. Since a kid, I wanted to build him, and we were using old beer cans. We had no equipment, nothing. As a 13-year-old or 12-year-old trying to build this mechanical dog, it failed miserably. But through time and patience, this dog has stood by us. So I'm actually designing him. I don't know why, I have this fascination, perhaps an alternate friend, a science fiction companion, as you were kids, you wished you had something like it. So I'm building him. I'm going to make a large statue of him. And he's called Magnus the Micromut. And he's a very nice dog. So I'll be working.
He's beautiful.
Tennessee, yeah.
So yeah, people, sorry, my audience, please do check out both Philip and Ronald on Facebook, and you're going to get updates almost daily on Ron's art and him working on his dog and all this other stuff, and Philip and what Philip's up to. Really, really recommend if they have room for more Facebook friends to follow them on Facebook.
I will just say that if there's anyone out there, you're important. Your work, your mind, your thoughts are important. And you have to understand how brilliant and amazing you are. When you've been touched by the singularity, it changes you and you grow. And remember that you are just as important. I don't care if you're the king with the crown or the man with the can, rich or poor, it matters not, because your spiritual sovereignty is what matters. So believe in who you are and believe that you can do it. You understand? So that's my little message. I mean, people can get us on the internet anyway, but you have to understand your greatness, your inherent greatness, which is important for you to realize. So when you get those days where you feel not, please, accept it, but get through it and say to yourself, I can and I will do it. and simple as.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I guess that's it for the show today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Ronald and Philip. Very much appreciate you making the time to be on my show today. I want to thank all the listeners and viewers, whether it's the replay, the live chat, or even on an audio podcast. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I am just thrilled to bits that you come and share by watching and everything. And so I guess we'll say goodbye for today, and we'll see you on Wednesday for the Quantum Guide Show, or next week for another episode of Aliens and Angels. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. God bless.
Thank you for joining me for the Aliens and Angels podcast. Read about my true life ET contact in my book called Transdimensional Meet the New Neighbors, which is now available on Amazon worldwide. Subscribe to my YouTube, Rumble, and X channels at Karen Holton TV. The like button and leave me a comment, and please do share this podcast with your friends. Check out my website at www.karenholtonhealthcoach.com to see my free resources and amazing products and services. All of the links will be in the description below. As part of the Forbidden Knowledge Network, you'll also find the Quantum Guide Show with Karen Holton on all audio platforms. Until next time, keep up the good work.